video as our introduction. Perfect. So we go back to the slides. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining to our first of hopefully many formation talks. This will be definitely an MVP. We have a second one planned. We will talk about the second one at the end, what will be the topic, and we really consider the first one into an MVP, an experiment. And I'm really happy that I can be part of the first one. Thanks, Philip, Ian, and Formation for trusting me with the moderation. And welcome. Good morning, everyone. What are we talking today about? The headline is Men versus Machine. How will technology change the future jobs of frontline workers? And for us, frontline workers is really anyone who, like from blue collar workers to intelligent workers, like doctors, accountants, lawyers. So please don't just think about the tractor driver or the Uber Lyft driver. So for us, the definition of a frontline worker is way broader, including lawyers, accountants, doctors, nurses, so to say. And the first part of our talk show this morning will really look at the status quo. And as I said before, ask any question in the chat and we will answer them during the discussion. And for the first part, or actually for all parts, of course, we have four guest speakers. We have Moritz, we have Thomas, Ian, and Markus today. They will say a sentence or two to themselves before they address the first question. And let's get right into the topic of man versus machine. And really the first part is looking at the status quo of what's going on today. And so far, technologies have always increased the prosperity of humanity. But now, for the first time, an industrial revolution is not about a new tool that increases the efficiency of human workers, but the new technology is capable of entirely replacing humans in the workplace. So, and that's the status quo. And the first question will be addressed to to Thomas, and it is in regards of the front-end workers at a broader definition. What digital transformation have we seen so far? And Markus, I would like you to open our discussion and answer first, and maybe add a sentence or two who you are, where you're coming from. You are muted, Markus. You have to unmute yourself.
Thank you. My name is Thomas. I'm working for the Würth Elektronik group as a startup and venture manager. And we see us as a hardware enabler for startups to bring their product to the market. And before, I worked for many years in a big company called Osram, and I often work together with the frontline workers. And from there, I know many things about what's new for them, what's the technology. And for the first question, yes, the digitalization for the front-end workers goes on, but they have to see it as a support for their work and help them. We see it at Würth Elektronik for the warehouse, where the packers have the tools to build up their orders or pack their orders by laser lights. They help them find the right components. That's support, and that's a part of the digitalization. Before they had only a card where they have to look, and so they have a support.
Thank you for that. Moritz, maybe you can go next and give you 2 cents to the first question of what we have seen so far as a status quo, and who you are and what you are doing.
Hi, my name is Moritz. I'm founder of Obob. Obob is a smartphone app that's actually, we call it a bit the photographic memory for projects, and especially for construction sites, facility management, so very much the front-end workers. And the focus that's also part of the answer to the question is a lot into helping that task and uniting a lot of little things that help then the frontline workers save time and be much more, even though the word is efficient, so that they, in the aftermath, the information that they're capturing is quickly given or handed over to office workers, etc. in the process. So where we are, I think we are already pretty much down the line. We often have the question or the debates whether to go for it, but I think in terms of using, we are already a lot down the line because we are using smartphones, we're using all kinds of devices, and that pace of adoption is accelerating. And I like often to take the example of that the Germans are pretty far advanced in using, or penetration rate of people using eBay 10 years or 15 years ago, or now WhatsApp is among the highest in the world. So even though we are very skeptical.
Thank you so much. Let's go a step further. And the second question is, what technologies are currently adding the most value to their jobs? And we thought we're gonna address this question to Moritz, building on what Markus just said. Where do you see the most value being created right now?
I think it's for frontline workers especially, it's really supporting the task, so that there is a need for transparency and collaboration. There's a lot of need for capturing information, for using that information, and that is, I think, where we are leading right now, where we have been headed so far. So that is not just, of course, just the mobile phone, but wherever we are capturing data, we are feeding information flows for ourselves, for the users, for the front line, but also then using them to be part of a chain of information. So I think that's the most important part, and I think also then helping, and that's maybe one of the challenges, that allows quite a bit of freedom of decision making and empowering the task. You know, doing rather than waiting for stuff, you can do it yourself. And but that also needs a bit of courage, and it needs quite a bit of self-sufficiency is maybe the wrong word, but this is probably the biggest thing that we need to be aware and to learn to much more use the technology in actually making decisions and actions.
Thank you. And I just realized that in my Google Doc, I'm very sorry, I mixed your names, Moritz and Markus, or in my mind, but also in my Google Sheet for sure. Yeah. Markus, building on what Moritz just said, maybe in regards to the construction industry, and then please also add a sentence or two of where you're coming from, what you're working on, and maybe you can bring this discussion to one level lower onto an industry where you see really current trends of machines adding a lot of value to the current workflows.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I'm Marcus, 49 years of co-founder of Next Data Service and one of the board members. We established our company 2.5 years ago, and we're solving industry problems with using AI. And I think it's 3 things I want to add. The first is we all know the Moore's law, that we are in an exponential growth of digitalization. It's not a linear. So speed is always getting faster. And therefore, even frontline workers, where maybe effects have been in 10 years' time, 20 years' time, now we have on a yearly basis massive changes in every kind of work. Secondly, machines take over decision-making and planning. And this is something which we hadn't had so far. As Thomas said in the beginning, like physical work in production or logistics has always been addressed by machines and taking it over. But now we're coming to the intelligent work where machines take over. And maybe an example, we all know flying, and you all walk through this radio-controlled kind of stuff where metal is checked in your body and if your pockets are empty. And so far we have been walking through, there was a beep if you have a coin in your pocket, and then a man checked your pocket. As from the last 2-3 years, the model has completely changed. Those machines do it on a completely autonomous basis. And I know this because I have a metal hip. I have a metal hip in my body. And nobody addressed me going through this gate ever since I have this, and it's 3 years ago. And I'm flying on a regular weekly basis. So machines are making decisions on security relevant things in airports, and no one knows except the machine gives an alarm. So this is taking over decision making, even in security critical situation and processes. And I think this is a pretty relevant example for a change in frontline workers.
Thank you so much, Markus. Ian, last but not least, maybe you can add a sentence or two of who you are, what you're doing, and give your perspective on maybe a broader perspective on what technologies are currently adding the most value to frontline worker jobs.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ian. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Formation. I've been a professional product designer for about 25 years now, so getting some gray hairs of wisdom. I've worked on a lot of diverse products, and some of them actually touching on this subject particularly. But I mean, more broadly, I mean, if we talk about technology and how it's helping frontline workers, I think it's important to say that we're at the very beginning of this, and you know, there's definitely a revolution going on in terms of AI and robotics. I mean, these are the kind of headline ones, and we'll probably talk a little bit more about those later. But just at a high level to say, you know, these are clearly going to be transformative, right? They're going to make some of the biggest differences. In terms of what's helping workers, I think like Markus touched on, you know, anything that kind of augments their memory effectively, right? Data logs, anything that's tracking data, complex moving processes in logistics centers and so on. The world is getting faster, as Markus said, and it is getting harder to keep track of. It's getting more complicated. So anything that helps us sort of augment our fairly limited kind of human memories to keep track of all this stuff is going to be probably key. And that's sort of already in place. There's a lot of work terminals, and we've all heard stories about maybe not so good, but on the Amazon side, where they have these logistical warehouses which are run with sort of military precision, but you have that ranging right across to, you know, Mittelstand firms that are in no way digitalized whatsoever. So they might just be working with paper right now or something, right? Okay, so that's sort of the spectrum we're kind of talking about. But yeah, it's an exciting time. I think you know, I think the frontline workers have a lot to gain. This has been a kind of a constant challenge in history, this idea of man versus machine, to address the overall topic. And you know, my point of view would be maybe it's not versus at all, really, that we're talking much more about augmentation and more of a partnership, and that probably is the smarter way to go, and the way that will take us kind of into a more positive future.
Thank you for highlighting the emotional aspects, and we will definitely talk about it just in a second. But before we do so, we have a question about what do you guys think that Corona and the new environment that was created through it will foster the replacement of jobs of frontline workers through technology? We have seen stocks like Tesla, also for other reasons than Corona, Amazon, Zoom, Zalando, they all break record highs. There is a shift in the marketplace apparently. And what do you guys see there will foster the replacement of frontline workers through technology? Will Corona play a big part in it, or will it go back to the usual 2019 times before it broke out? Maybe Thomas, if you have a thought, and then we can also hear Marcus on that topic.
Yes, we see it also in the sales channel, because what is Würth doing? They are selling products, and normally they sell products directly, and that's our business. And we see in the Corona crisis, we can't go to our customer, and we have to talk to them about over a video telephone or something like that. We have some platforms to order our products online, but it's not the same, because for us, we want to drive innovation, and therefore we have to go to the customer, look what they do. When we only have online selling platforms, we can't see what the customer do, what they at what innovation they work on. And for that, we, on the one side, we need something that's from selling to direct sell to came to the customer. And I think, yes, the online selling will going on, will be bigger in the whole action, but we also need at the end the direct contact to our customer to talk about the things.
Yeah, it's a really interesting example, the digital sales funnels, because a friend of mine told me recently he was looking to buy a car, and he went to those traditional websites like Volkswagen, BMW, Mercedes, and he even went through this car configurator, and he felt really dumb because he had 20 options of a car engine, and that he had the floor mat with 10 options, and he was like so overwhelmed by all the terms, the technicalities, that he was really taken off. And then he went to Tesla, and you have 3 options, 3 cars. Then per car you have 2 options, range or performance, and it's almost like buying an iPhone. And then he compared the two. He didn't buy a Tesla car, but he was like, oh, that digital online sales performance is so different than the classical websites. Marcus, what have you seen being changing? And we talked about, for example, your wife and school and education system, and maybe other examples you have.
Well, I think this Corona thing, where people can't interact on a personal basis, changes especially those industries where digitalization has not been an integrated part so far. As you mentioned, my wife is a primary school teacher. They were not allowed to go into school, as we all know. So how could technology help educating pupils, students on a digital basis, having them at home, having them in small groups? And what I felt is this small school has from almost zero digitalization to, I would say, 60, 70%. She was completely, she's a headmaster of the school, she was completely able to have trained and schooled all of their children in small groups via Microsoft Teams, via uploading questions and works, so that they completely did it at home, gave back their answers on a platform, and where small groups discussed it, and the individual help of going directly to the needs of each and every student or pupil was much better than having them in a group of 20 or 30 where everybody can hide himself if he or she doesn't want. So this digitalization helps to have a more individual and personally shaped curriculum. And the school will definitely, even if they are back to normal work right now, keep some of these processes because it adds value to the learning process. And they would never have undertaken this change in a 4 or 6 weeks period if Corona wouldn't have been the push.
Yes. And we see apps where the students can put in their answers, and then these apps automatically analyze for the teacher, and then the teacher sees in front of her. This is in a physical room, but of course it can also be done online, of course, and then she can point out, hey, Danny, exactly what's wrong there. Please go ahead.
I have been founding a company in Europe that has like a voting system for school invented on a USB service, pretty easy. It was 2002, and I wasn't able to sell it to schools, neither to any other learning platforms. And now, 15 years later, or 18 years later, they pull it. And I think we'll have this massive change even in intellectual work, where so far there was either enough money that they didn't need to do that, or where change was kind of rejected by the people, where teachers are, to my impression, a big resistant group. So workers have to change, and they have to adopt this, and there will be massive changes, and nobody should be left behind by not changing.
Yes. Moritz, you have an interesting perspective on it. I know when we talked about that topic that you said, but wait a minute, remote surgery is guided through text messages in some countries. Isn't that new? Maybe you want to share your perspective on that question of how Corona shaped and maybe will foster and fasten the replacement of traditional jobs.
I mean, your question was so far interesting because, as you mentioned, for example, when technology really helps us, we have adopted and used it, even though it's maybe very rough. Like you mentioned, the operations that were guided with SMS messages, which already happened 10, 15, sometimes 20 years ago, because there was no other help available. Regarding, for example, the sales aspect, I think the one interesting part is that if you we often think that this kind of technical perspective on innovation or on digitalization is the way to go. Like, for example, you mentioned the car sales example. However, I challenge all car manufacturers, how many cars are actually sold through the configurator? There are very few, because for most cars, actually, you go to the dealer or you go somewhere and you have much better offers on particular cars, especially in the, let's say, the lower ranges, than if you were to go to the configurator, because it would be much, much more expensive. So for a very expensive car, it makes sense. But for all the cars that most people buy, actually, you will be offered by some dealer or by some manufacturer certain cars that are previously spec'd. So it's this where the interaction with a salesperson would be advantageous. Same, taking the Würth example and similar kind of distribution channels. These sales guys are spending a lot of time visiting certain construction sites, and that takes a lot of time. So many of the other opportunities they might have, they don't go to because physically they are limited. If we are now then thinking about digital solutions for that, if they had access to, let's say, visual stuff or any kind of information about construction sites of their customers or potential customers, they could anticipate. So they don't need to go to many of these sites every week or every 2 weeks, but they maybe just would go once a month, but then they would be prepared, or they could interact directly using whatever chat channels or voice or email, whatever, in order to say, well, by the way, I saw that you were doing this and that. We have a much better product that helps you save time and is much more reliable on construction sites. And so this is, I think, where it gets interesting. And with Corona, many of these aspects, I think, will accelerate because we just adopt them more easily, even in sectors that were previously underserved in that regard. For example, the construction sector is by far one of the sectors that is really behind productivity.
And to your point with the sales process, I mean, these websites from the traditional car manufacturers are designed to not sell cars. They are designed to inform, or it's a branding, or whatever their goal is. Tesla's site is designed to sell cars, because the traditional car manufacturers know that their sales distribution is mainly done through those car dealerships that have their special places on the map. And similar, like a yoga brand, Lululemon, they originally, before the crisis, made, I think, 80% of their sales through their normal shops, through their dealers. They own these shops, and after Corona, it flipped completely around. So they are now selling 80% online, and they're expecting people not come back into the shops because they have the trust in the brand. And actually, the company was ready to sell online. So it's interesting mindset shifts there, how Tesla, a software company, versus car manufacturers, they deal with the crisis. And looking at the emotional aspects of it, that studies show that many workers believe that the risk of being replaced only exists for other jobs. So it's not my problem, it's not my challenge. But the World Economic Forum predicts that as soon as 25, machines will do the majority of working hours on the planet. With that in mind, maybe looking at Moritz or Thomas as a first indication of, what do you think, why people underestimate this huge wave of replacements coming their way?
Sorry, underestimate or overestimate?
Underestimate, yeah, because they say I'm not belonging to that group. I don't have any concerns.
I think in public discussion, many people are even overestimating, because they think that people will be replaced one-to-one, where most evolution things happen, slowly. They happen in parallel. Some of the jobs may change or may disappear, but it's not like overnight they are gone. So I think that what most people why they underestimate it is that some of that change is happening without them really noticing it. So the debate in the public is going somewhere, whereas their own usage already has adopted. When you have new technologies coming in, people usually like to compare it to the current way that they are living or working, and then they have a bit problems or anticipating where this might lead, why they would need it, and they don't really go into these what-if scenarios. And you have that for every technology, like smartphones is one of these examples where people ask, why do I need a smartphone? I have a normal telephone, that's enough for me. Same with the horse in the car or electricity. You had these debates all the time. And of course, nowadays with social media and IoT, so people are thinking always, where would I need it? But then there are new ways of using them, and then suddenly they are there and they haven't even realized it.
Mhm.
Yes, I think the problem is that the front workers were not involved from the persons who wanted to implement new technologies. I know it from Osram. There's a very good example. They built up a new ticket, it's called Ticket Manager, for the technical workers in the line, to support them to find the problem at the machine. But there was a small team for only 3 person or 4 person. They developed the ticket manager, and they don't ask the frontline worker what they need, how does the system works. And after 1 year, they integrated the system. They gave them a smartphone in their hand and said, now we have a new system, work with them. And so there was a problem. They were against the system. They don't work with the system. You can't integrate it. And I think that's a big problem, that the frontline worker don't were involved in the new process, in the digitalization. And yes, that's the problem I see.
And it's a tricky topic, right, Ian? If you look at how products get developed, and usually we choose a customer centricity first approach where we talk with the potential users. But if we have in mind that most of the jobs will be replaced, but we want to talk to those people that will be replaced, how do you think we, what approach should we take? Or is there something that we need to do differently when developing these technologies to diffuse the fears?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's all about discussion here, right? So it's about consultation where, the be affected are going to have to use the new tools, feel like they've been listened to, and that what the requirements they have are part of the plan. Like Thomas just said, it's if they're not included in that planning stage, the chances of them rejecting whatever is proposed is very high. So in order to get successful adoption and better products and better solutions and better technologies for the workplace, for frontline workers, they need to be a part of it. Also, in terms of like the actual solutions themselves, the workers need to feel like there's always a human in the loop. I'm not 100% sure that they will be replaced as such. I think their roles will change a lot. The actual statistics out there at the moment, in terms of frontline workers, there's actually a shortage. In terms of, particularly in the production sector, there's actually a shortage of people. So the need and the supply are not aligned, and the need is way higher than the current supply. So it's kind of interesting. It goes against the kind of conception that they're all being sort of kicked out of jobs and stuff. The actual reality on the ground is quite different. So there actually is a lot of scope still for automation to cover the shortfall. So I think workers need to be properly consulted, but they do need to understand that the fear sometimes is just purely an emotional response. It's not actually grounded in reality or in facts. And I think that's a kind of a hopeful thing, that there's a chance to work with frontline workers and in a way that things are properly explained and properly put into context, and that the tools are designed with a human-centric approach. So design thinking is a key kind of strategy and tool here. And I think if those kinds of things, those best practice things are adhered to, then we can get a really good outcome here in terms of what the companies need and what the workers themselves want. But I think the key word here will be consultation.
Consultation. Thank you, Ian. And Markus, for you is the next part. But before we go to the next part, I just want to highlight that for our guests joining us, and thank you for staying with us. We can continue this conversation on LinkedIn, and I will just pull up a LinkedIn link here on the screen, so you can join our group there on LinkedIn, ask your questions that might even come later, invite other people if you think that's relevant for them. Please make use of the LinkedIn, and all experts will be there in the group. So if you have questions, or even if you want to start a debate where you think the room here isn't there, but you want to challenge one or two viewpoints, the room will definitely be in the LinkedIn group. But looking into the second part, we looked at the status quo, and the second part, we want to look into the future, robots and AI in marriage. So what technologies are coming next, and how will they impact the work environment? Today, most robots are programmed to do one task, and they fail as soon as something surprising happens. This still gives humanity an edge and requires workers to be around. But what happens when AI and robotics merge? And maybe the first question to you, Markus, what technologies do you see coming where you really see an interesting mix of AI, robotics, and maybe even humans, but some of the human jobs being replaced?
Yeah, thanks. I think AI and big data makes a huge difference because, as you said, so far we have been on the physical work side. And let me give you an example. And like we are working with hospitals, and we are developing a product that is helping to organize operations in operations rooms. So there are many rooms, there are many criteria, a lot of changes going on. If something takes longer, if an emergency comes up, and it's kind of a really, really complex job for a whole team of operation room planners. And the complexity is really stressful, and processes are not robust because of these many changes. So we have invented a tool that is working with about 100 criteria and planning with AI-based learning methodology on a fingertip basis. What kind of would be the best plans to serve employees and patients? So now the question is, how could you have this AI planning process implemented into the normal workers process? And by this, one criteria is really important. It's trust. Do people that are necessary to work with it, to be consulted, to have this AI tool as a support, not as a replacement, as Ian just said too. And how could you combine this? And the combination is only working by man trust machine. And we do it like we implement it, and then we have about a 3, 4, 5 month process working in parallel. The machine is suggesting something, and man is making the decision. And by using the suggestion, man learns that machine is doing a good job. But at the end, the man has to take the responsibility, because that's something machines cannot do. So finding out where responsibility can be delegated to machines, and where people, mankind, with our values, have to be responsible what is happening, and to what extent can I delegate my responsibility to support from the machine. This is a really interesting process, and I think this is always specific on the domain, the concrete use case, and the responsibility critical issue. So it's not a general answer to a general question, but even in hospital, well, it's pretty interesting what's going on there.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe let's look at one of the questions our audience asked. Atzora asked, what are the key emerging market trends you are seeing in the FM industry, and what technical capabilities would companies need to start developing to meet the future requirements? I must admit, I don't know what FM industry stands for. Maybe someone can help me.
Yes.
Yes, perfect. Maybe then you go ahead and do you have an answer for that, or a first take?
Yes, of course. The facility management, for example, there's the frontline worker is really, really important in order to gather information, like the Hausmeister, the keeper, the plumber, whomever is looking into it. And one of the big challenges they have is that they are supposed to keep the buildings, for example, in shape, and to they have certain budgets that are there for renovation or improvement of the building, and often they can't really get into that role because they don't know really what's going on. They need this information. And one of the things where facility management is looking into is how to get that information, how to empower the people on the site to capture additional information that may help to for renovation. You know, that they include certain observations. The plumber maybe looks at the windows and says, well, the windows should be, or somebody else says the cleaning team is one of the most underestimated sides of facility management, I guess. The cleaning team usually knows nearly everything which goes on in the building, but they don't pass on that information in most cases, and therefore facility management owners, etc., they don't benefit from that know-how. And one of the formation, for example, if you know, when you want to have indoor localization, that's an issue for Ian probably. One of the things is that you need to regularly go on a site in order to capture information. And the cleaning team, for example, could be a very good part of that, capturing information automatically for indoor localization. I pass on to Ian for that one.
Thanks, Moritz. Yeah, for sure. I would say that here's kind of connecting the dots. I would think that, you know, if we're talking about high-level trends, I would say it is about connecting these different data points that some exist already, some don't exist at all. Like Moritz just said, you know, there's people who are part of the operation of the building who don't contribute to the knowledge about the building. So so that's kind of a key part. I think it's connecting those information sources into a kind of sort of central knowledge about the building itself. that the building in some way is becoming smarter. I mean, the obvious trend to point out here is the Internet of Things. I mean, that's buildings are getting smarter. We've spent the last 8 months in Bosch IO campus in Tempelhofer Hafen here in Berlin, and it's a extremely beautiful modern building. It's a very smart building indeed, and you know, there's a lot of sensors. There's a lot of aspects of the building where it's sort of self-reporting about what's going on inside the building at all times, and so that's probably the biggest trend, is that it's not just a big dumb pile of bricks and glass anymore. It's actually getting quite smart. And so the interface between the human and the building is going to get more rich and needs to, because there's going to be more information to consume, but also remotely controlling the building or aspects of the building or the way it's working. And of course, with Corona, if we're talking high-level trends, you have building occupancy is a huge deal at the moment. Obviously, so there's the occupancy in terms of Corona compliance, but there's also, you know, occupancy management in general, social distancing and so on. So it's a time of change, I would say, in the FM industry, like many other industries right now.
And if you have to list, Ian, if you have to list a few industries that might even see the biggest changes going forward, what would be the top 3 where you have an eye on these ones?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would certainly think the transport industries in general are going to change dramatically. I mean, the utilization numbers are very different now. We don't know where they're going to go from here. You know, like you asked earlier, will they normalize or will they stay low? So I would say that industry in particular. I mean, also tying into that, it's the automation that's coming in terms of self-driving vehicles, autonomous vehicles, particularly on the commercial side. You'd imagine that's an area that's going to see a lot of change very quickly. Tesla are pushing for level 5 autonomy at the moment. Pretty much once that's achieved, autonomous vehicles would very quickly become legal and roadworthy as completely unsupervised in most countries, and therefore you're going to see a huge switch by logistics companies over to you know, autonomous vehicles. There may be a human in the loop again, you know, to supervise the vehicle, to do unloading or loading, deliveries and so on, or just to be there as a safe pair of hands in case something goes wrong. But generally speaking, that industry is going to become heavily autonomous. The financial incentives are so huge that it will probably be one of the most aggressively hit. I would also say just manufacturing in general. I mean, you asked earlier about AI and robotics converging, and I mean, you get those two really converging, and you kind of get the computer brain and the computer body, and then they're kind of in one, and then you have this. All right, so you can easily imagine from there how a lot of manual tasks that are performed today would be carried out by these kinds of machines. So I think anything which is, you know, effectively pure manual work will probably be heavily automated in the years ahead, and it will probably see the highest rate of change. Yeah, other people have talked about it, but probably the medical world is probably the third one I would name, because I would think that robotic surgeries are getting a lot of headlines in the last couple of years. There's been reports of robotic surgeons outperforming real humans in terms of stitching, and one of those classic kind of doctor skills. But it's actually safer now to have that done by robotics. There's also the telepresence aspect to that, where, you know, it might be easier to send a machine and have a real surgeon operate that remotely or something like that. So I would say in general, the health world will see a huge amount of change as well. So it would be my picks.
Yeah. Maybe Thomas, where do you see little change? To take the other point, well, like, do you see an industry that won't be affected by it in the next 20, 30 years? Like, don't worry at all. I know it's a hard prediction to make, but do you see anything that doesn't get changed or will not be affected?
it's not so easy to answer, but
I think it
no, I think many things which, yes, it's not easy to say which industry will be not part of this.
But your answer is also like your non-answer is also an answer, because it could
Yes.
you could say
Yes.
everything will change.
I think sooner or later something will change.
Yeah.
And but I think there's some things where you say when you go dining also, you don't want to serve by a robot because you need the feeling. I think there are some things where you said you don't want to have machines in this part. I think so, like that. But there, on the other side, you see people, they want it. It's I think
That's true.
about it.
what I
That's true. I think Moritz, you wanted to.
the
Yeah,
one thing is
please.
that we have always there was this question of support or replacing also in the forum, and it's the same that there will be many jobs which will have certain, for example, manual labor that may continue, but the way they do it, the way they are handing over their job, or the way that their job will be helped, that will change. As with many things, it's usually not the one-to-one replacement. For all of us have, and including all participants here in the forum, we all have a lot of tasks and jobs that, I don't know, 20 years ago, maybe even 10 years ago, but certainly 50 or 60 years ago, didn't even exist. So how to explain to a person 60 years ago what you are doing right now? And the same goes on for the stuff that is to come. For example, if we think about autonomous cars, it's always this idea that this one car will do it. But actually, what's much more likely is that, for example, inner cities will be closed up increasingly and then will be widened as circles. And within these perimeters, you will have only certain vehicles that are allowed. And that already happened with emission laws and others. But there will probably be, okay, the semi-autonomous or autonomous vehicle in that particular city needs to have these standards. And these standards will not work outside the city because it'll be becoming more complex. So the typical example of a car in the mountain, and then you have to, at an emergency situation, there is suddenly a person, and I need to either go into the wall or maybe drive myself off the cliff. That is a decision that usually in a city will not happen. So I can restrict all these kind of complexities, and then the autonomous driving or autonomous car city is much closer than maybe the one car that does it all, because that would include too many unknowns. And same for ways how we work and stuff we do, because it's rarely a one-to-one replacement. There are some jobs which will disappear, but always predicting which are the ones to disappear is, I don't know.
Yeah.
For example, the delivery man. I don't see the delivery man that much changing. Maybe there will be fewer, but maybe they will be just also the guys who are then not just delivering things, but also helping things to put in, because the final technology to hand over something is maybe too complicated at some point.
Yeah, I have a weird example maybe, but I went to the sauna this weekend, and they put this kind of stuff onto the oven, and then, I mean, because of Corona, they can't do this circulation of the air, but maybe some people would prefer not to have other human being there in the sauna and having done this by machines. But for me, that would lose the whole experience of someone serving you, the hospitality character of it. So I think anything that has this hospitality aspect, I agree, serving food in this environment would make a big difference. But looking at the time, and we only have 6 minutes left, we want to address the third part, and how can you benefit? Like, how can even though companies see the changes coming, many of them still don't act. And the first question here in this whole block of how do you benefit with your company from this massive change that is now about to happen, or it's already taken place. What are some factors that determine that you have to act today? And maybe Markus, you can start first.
Yeah, I'll make it short. In the past, technology has changed processes and tasks, and now technology changes business models. And those companies who are reluctant in adopting the change, they will be pushed out of the market because digital business models will change the basis for their own business model. So be aware what's going on in your industry, understand and make a decision of how to adapt, not when.
What factors do you see for companies, for your company or other companies, to act on this massive change?
As for our company, I see the future technologies to support the jobs of the frontline workers from now. I see then many things about chatbots, or to come to the real problem of the customer before they go in, or something like to make reports after a visit at the customer. They have the problem after that, they have to go to their laptop, put everything in. If they have a voice-guided system database, after the talk, when they go to their car, drive to the next customer, they can say everything they have done in the meeting, and it will be put into the database, and the orders will take place, and something like that. It is a support of the frontline workers from now, and I see a very big chance to do more things in this case.
Thank you, Thomas. Moritz, what's your take? And also, how can we motivate our employees to act? And what might be even required to learn for them to succeed and with these new technologies?
Yes, where we will head. I mean, right now it's a tool that we want to make as easy as possible for the people to use. And Obob was always designed, and this is, I think, very important for such tools, to help that person who needs and uses it first. So anybody who needs, for example, in our case, to make photos, we try to make that as easy as possible, and to capture all information automatically so that you don't have to enter it manually, so that this task is helped, and hopefully maybe at some point even maybe a pleasure, because you can feed your reference list, or being proud, or people like to call the gamification, but also then to capture information, for example, because we are on that visual media, to say, okay, we know the location, we know what an object that can be recognized, so maybe an electronic object or a heating plumbing stuff, boiler, and we can already put in some information that might help the user to know what this is, and maybe even to say, okay, this machine needs updating, or the filter needs replacing, and you have maybe to additionally capture this and that for in order to document your work. And this is where we would like to emphasize a lot, and to go deeper in order to have this much more at this initial moment of usage, so that we capture as much as possible on that moment to help the user.
So much. Maybe Ian, last but not least, before I announce the next formation talk, just looking at you from your perspective, you're building a technology, you're helping companies. How do you generally advise them to motivate using this new technology, and what can we do to upskill those employees to succeed with these new technologies?
Sure, it's a really good question. It goes to the human nature of it all, and I think the key things to make tools that are genuinely useful and benefit the workers in a very real way, right? So if their self-interest is triggered in the sense that their daily working lives become better because they're using certain tools, then they're just intrinsically going to be motivated to use them, right? I think that maybe the second piece of that is the fear side. So I think in Germany in particular, there's the culture goes a little bit against the adoption of digital technologies. We all sort of know this topic. And I think a lot of that has got to be sort of around building trust and trying to explain to the workers that they can enjoy the benefits of these digital tools without sort of compromising their privacy or their data or their rights in any way. That technology can be an enabler. It can make life better, and it can really help them do a better job. And I think that's fundamentally what everybody's kind of wants. So I think it's again about this consultation and proper explanation about why certain technologies are being adopted, and that they're not just forced upon people, that you bring them along as part of that journey.
Thank you so much, and not only you, Ian, thank you so much. But before we go into the thank you round, I just want to quickly announce the next event and bring up the sign up button right here if you guys want to have it easy and convenient. The next topic will be about location intelligence and data privacy. It will happen on December 7th on 11 a.m., same time as today. We will have speakers from Bosch, from United, Signal, and Formation. And we would really love for you to come again. And as a quick remark also, our discussion will be continued on LinkedIn. Please join if you want to foster your understanding of what we talked today about. And a big thank you to Thomas, Moritz, Markus, and Ian for taking the time today and joining our talks. As I said before, we will be continuing the discussion on LinkedIn. Please connect there with our guests and speakers. And if you have any question, please go to LinkedIn and share it there. Is there any departing thoughts or comments from you guys?
Thanks, Danny.
Yeah, thanks.
Oh, cool.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. The first talk show I have ever been part of, so that's an exciting start of the week. Thank you to now 9 attendees that you stick with us. Thank you so much to Asura, Charlie, Etienne, Jakob, Gilles, Joris, Jose, Mike, Zaura, and Vilja. I know it's sometimes not easy to stay active and be part of that, so thank you that you dialed in till the end of the conversation. I already see 2 people being interested in the next one. We will definitely share an email and announce the event on LinkedIn in the group and on our personal site. So thank you so much for joining us, and thank you so much, guests, for being part of the conversation. See you next time.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.